Jonathan, if you can be here, we'll have Miko here.
Okay,
Kenya here.
Yeah,
وين ما بدكم.
thank you.
And then you and I are going to share the microphone if that's okay with you.
Welcome. Yes, you do.
Wow, I love that.
Oh, yeah. I got this and the tie.
I saw the time. I was thinking, wow, that's nice. Nice.
Gotta represent my people.
Testing. Where is everybody?
After lunch, it's always difficult.
Yeah, this is a big enough panel, I think. I think once we start getting going, people will start to make their way back in. They hear the voices speaking.
Yes, of course. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and start so we can stay on track and make sure we wrap up in time so we can enjoy a little break before the evening festivities. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Jinan. I'm the ADC National Organizer, and this is our last panel of the day. So we've had a very eventful day so far, a lot of great speakers and a lot of great topics, and I think this is one that I think everybody's always excited for. We always have a Palestine-related panel, and with the summer upon us and people traveling, we know that there are a lot of questions about travel restrictions, especially with the new guidelines that were released back in May. They've been postponed until July, but obviously there's, you know, a lot of questions about it, and I think we're very lucky to have all of these experts here with us today to help us understand it a little bit better and to get a little bit more information on what it means specifically for Palestinian and Arab Americans who are going to be traveling to the West Bank. I do want to make a note. It might seem a little light on the female representation up here, but I will say that we did ask many amazing female leaders to be on this panel with us, and as most women, they are out doing other amazing things and couldn't be with us today, so we had to settle for these guys instead. Just kidding.
That's a problem.
Listen, I mean, you know, truth is the truth. So with us we have Chris Habibi, who is our ADC Legislative Policy Coordinator. He's been working on the visa waiver program, which he will be discussing as part of this panel. We also have Hanna Hanania, who is obviously a well-known community activist who also has a lot of experience, you know, traveling to Palestine, dealing with a lot of these travel restrictions and issues. And then over here we have Miko Peled, who's an activist, very well-known author, an advocate for Palestinians here and in Palestine. And then, of course, Jonathan Kutab, who is an author, an activist, you know, all around, you know, huge Palestinian advocate and activist as well. So without further ado, we actually do have some slides that our amazing intern, Brooke, where are you? Are you in the room? She's right there in the back. Created these slides for us discussing the different types of permits and visas for like foreigners traveling into Palestine. So we're gonna have Chris talk a little bit about what each of these sections mean, and then we also have a flow chart that's gonna explain the process on whether or not you're gonna need to get a visa with the new COGAT guidelines.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to echo Janen's thanks for Brooke's work. When she came on and I asked her to kind of synthesize this 97-page document, I knew that it was bad, but she was able to really distill this complex, by design, complicated ordinance in a way that at least I somewhat understand, to the best of my knowledge at least. And I do want to mention at the top that, you know, none of this is legal advice. We are giving you the best information that we can to the best of our understanding, but do not take it as legal fact. And also, I should mention, like Janen said, it's not implemented yet, but this really ordinance, all it really does is formalizes practices that we know already go on. And you could show up and they could ask even more invasive questions than what's listed. And, you know, the arbitrariness is the point. So that's just all something to keep in mind. But before I kind of go through each specific type of permit, I did want to give Jonathan an opportunity to just kind of give us a foundation of what COGAT is and kind of what their role is in traveling to the occupied territories.
Thank you very much. I don't know how much time I have to do that.
That is total for the whole session, not just for you.
For this section. First of all, I want to say that this COGAT is actually the inheritor or the follower of the civil administration. From 1967 until the Oslo Agreement, the entire West Bank was run by the civil administration acting on behalf of the defense ministry. Oslo created a new reality where they pretended that there is a new entity called the Palestinian Authority. But the Israeli military government continued actually to be the source of power, acting through COGAT, which is the coordinator of government activities in the territories. They continue to be the real power in the occupied territories in all civilian matters that pertain to the Palestinians. Why is that important? It's important because the entire West Bank is actually part of an envelope with what's called the State of Israel, including East Jerusalem. So that even though they are legally separate entities, they are in fact run by the same authorities and for the same purposes. But COGAT pretends to be acting and creating regulations in matters that pertain to the local population that continue to be under Israel's control. One of them, obviously, is access. Who can go in and who cannot go in. And this they do in close coordination with the Israeli Ministry of Interior that does the same for Israel and Jerusalem. So whether you come through the airport or through the bridge, you are really subject to similar but not the same regulations. Now, this is a little difficult because millions of people come into the borders of Israel every year. And for Israel to treat them differently without openly admitting that it's an apartheid state, they have to create regulations that look on paper as if they are laws and regulations that apply to everybody. But everybody knows, the Israelis know and the Palestinians know, that these regulations are just a cover, that the reality is a political reality. Now, since the pretty much collapse of the two-state proposal, it's become very clear to Israelis first, but also to Palestinians, that this is not a temporary state of affairs until authority is turned over to the Palestinians. This is a permanent state of affairs, and therefore it should be regulated. So all this hush-hush, behind the scene, wink, wink, everybody knows what the reality is, but nobody admits it, now needs to be put into law, needs to be regulated. So you have to understand, there's 3 million people living in the West Bank and about 700,000 settlers, Jewish settlers. They are living there and they are being governed by COGAT when it comes to issues of entry into the area. Now, COGAT not only doesn't have any interest in doing what's right for the people, they have no accountability, they don't vote for them, they don't answer to them. Not only don't they care about the interests of these people, but they also consider them an enemy to the authority. So if they do things that hurt them, so what? They are our enemy anyway. And we are running the laws, and we run them in our interest, not in their interest. So they don't act in the interest of Palestinians. They treat the Palestinians as enemy. And third, and this is very important, even when they have no interest in denying or granting visas or permission, they can still use that authority to advance their own interests. For example, they have no interest in making sure whether a cancer patient is allowed to travel to Jerusalem to get treatment or to abroad. They really don't have an interest, political or otherwise. But they can use the authority and the power of granting or not granting that interest to either punish them or let off steam if they themselves are angry, or to get them to collaborate with them. They will actually tell you, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. You need a permit to get your cancer treatment. I need some information from you, or I need something from you. Now, sometimes these regulations or behind the scene become explicit. For example, if you support BDS, they will turn you back at the airport because BDS was a big thing for a while. Now maybe something else is going to be a big thing, apartheid. If you talk about apartheid, then maybe you will be turned back at the airport or not allowed in. Or maybe there's a certain area that they don't like, Jenin right now. They don't like. So if you're from Jenin or the Jenin area, you may be facing greater scrutiny and greater questioning at the airport. So we have to remember these are new regulations that are now saying in writing and in fact when they give or don't give permits. Now, there are several categories that they are concerned about, and they cover them by the regulations. For example, we know that there are some people who come to teach at the university. Wonderful. They need our permit, so we put criteria. How many we allow to come in as teachers, what subjects they teach. Not determined by the universities what's important to them, but determined by us, what we allow and what we don't allow for people to come in. How many students come in? How many business people come in? Another category that's problematic for us is spouses, foreigners who are married to Palestinians. So we have to have some regulations. Usually everybody knows that a spouse of a Palestinian needs a permit, needs a visa to come and live with her or his spouse in the West Bank. So this is an opportunity for us to control how many we allow in, when do we allow them in. And this, by the way, has nothing to do with security because they can always deny anybody on security basis. This has to do with demography. How many people do we want to allow? And it has to do with, do we allow people to come in at all? And under what criteria? So these regulations have a whole bunch of details about when spouses are allowed and not allowed. Then there is something really, really very bad. If there's a whole category that has not been covered by the regulations, that's no problem. They're simply denied altogether. They can't even apply because the person who writes these regulations has no interest in allowing these people in. So they're not even covered. So it's not like there's another category called miscellaneous, everybody else needs to apply for a visa. No, these people can't even apply because they are not governed under the regulations. So in this way, regulations that appear on their face to be laws that regulate what happens are in fact tools for implementing policies that everybody knows are there, but nobody is willing to admit that they are what regulates. I just wanted to put this as a background context before we look at these regulations. And remember, in all of these regulations, there is a strong element of discretion. We will allow who we want to allow without necessarily telling you why we deny or allow them in. But if you want some regulations, here are regulations. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way of explaining it.
Thank you.
And-
Yes. So if we want to put the flow chart.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. Yeah, so we could put the flow chart back up. But obviously, like Jonathan said, this is stuff that's been happening obviously for years. I mean, the last time I was in Palestine was 2004. It was a very long time ago. But even back then, we were being detained at the border, questioned before we were even allowed in. My mom went 3 years ago before COVID. She was also held for 3-4 hours, same thing. There's people who have gone recently and have been denied entry and sent right back to the United States. So this is only formalizing what's already in practice. But then once you formalize it, then, you know, it's very,
There's something at least we can point to now.
yeah.
Look at this.
Yes.
So really quick with this flow chart. So with the ordinance, who does it apply to? Doesn't apply to anybody with a Palestinian Hawiyah ID. You're treated as a Palestinian no matter what else other form of identification you have. You have an American passport, they don't care. They treat you as a Palestinian. If you have any other sort of citizenship, it does not matter. You are a Palestinian to them. So this ordinance applies only to what they define as foreigners, anybody who's not a citizen of the State of Israel or a holder of a Palestinian ID. And Jonathan did a really good job explaining the specific purpose permits for the scholars and the spousal permits. The one point I want to highlight with the spousal permits is they're issued for a year, and you can extend them, but only for another year and 5 months. So up to 27 months, you can live with your spouse, and then you have to leave and go through the process all over again. It's just, again, it's complicated and arbitrary.
It's literally just meant to discourage,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. The one that I think a lot of folks here are going to be interested in is the short-term stay permit. So anything less than 3 months, you can't get more than that. And that's where you have to apply 45 days in advance, answer all these questions. And again, they could ask you more if they decide that they want to, or they've had a bad day, and so they want to make your life harder. But those are the ones that folks that want to travel to the West Bank are going to probably be the ones that's going to be the one that you're applying for. There's a couple like different angles to it. The visa waiver program is the one that I'm just going to quickly touch on before we dive into our discussion. It's ironically, Israel already allows American citizens to travel there with their visa waiver program. You show up as an American citizen, they would just grant your visa right there, and then you don't need to apply in advance. But if you have to, if you want to travel to the West Bank, no, totally different. And Israel right now is trying to get into the U.S.'s visa waiver program. So Israeli citizens can come to the United States on that same 3-month tourist visa without applying in advance, they can show up at the airport here in the States and just get it stamped. Very easy, no strings attached, all of it. And in order for them to be added to this visa waiver program, there are certain conditions that by law Israel has to meet. And the biggest one and the biggest obstacle is what's called reciprocity. They cannot treat our citizens any differently than we treat their citizens. So if they want the U.S. to treat Israeli citizens all the same, they can come in, get that 3-month tourist visa stamped. They have to treat American citizens the same way. But like I mentioned, if you are a dual U.S. Palestinian citizen, you're not treated as an American citizen. So right off the bat, there is that lack of reciprocity. And then you add into the mix this overtly discriminatory policies when it comes to travel, and it makes reciprocity that much more difficult to even on its face show. And so Hannah and I and ADC have been working with the Department of Homeland Security to make sure that they are aware of the intricacies and the complexities that a Palestinian American like Hannah has whenever he wants to travel. to the area. That he has to go through Jordan. He can't fly into Tel Aviv, and it's just. I'm sure he can give more detail on that, but I'm going to pass it back to Janan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm going to give it over to Miko now to discuss. So Miko frequently travels to Palestine. He knows the ins and outs of everything that happens there. He is a huge activist on the ground there and is always, supporting the communities there and sees firsthand what the Palestinians have to go through. So Miko's just going to touch a little bit around other policies that are already in place, other factors that are making Palestinians' lives more difficult, and things that he's seen. So go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. This is fascinating. But of course, I come from a completely different perspective because I come from the privileged side of the apartheid. So I don't face any of these issues. I can land in Tel Aviv tomorrow, drive straight to Hebron, to the settlement, and have no problems whatsoever. Or to any other part of the country, and have absolutely no problem whatsoever. And that is really comparing my experience to the experience of any Palestinian or anybody, whether or not they have a Palestinian ID, even if they just have a Palestinian name or any Arab name. The experience at the airport is an entirely different experience, and actually the experience at the bridge, if you come in from Jordan, is a completely different experience too. But I can literally land in Tel Aviv tomorrow, drive straight to Hebron or to Nablus or to any of the settlements in what they call Judea and Samaria with no problem whatsoever. In fact, I could probably take somebody in the car and take them to Hebron or take them to Nablus. I could have Osama bin Laden in the car, and because I have an Israeli license plate, I can take them straight to wherever they want to go and not even be stopped once. And so that's the absurdity of this reality, that on the one hand, it's so porous and so easy. On the other hand, they're adding all these ridiculous restrictions. Michael Sfard, the Israeli human rights attorney, is quite well known. He wrote a few years ago that regarding all the permits and the restrictions, he said the life for Palestinians, he described it as mountains of permits and oceans of restrictions that Palestinians have to go through. And he was talking particularly about the experience that Palestinians have to go through if they want to visit a loved one in an Israeli prison. He said it was easier, he actually wrote this, he said it was easier for somebody in France in the 19th century to visit a loved one in Devil's Island than it is for a Palestinian living in the West Bank to travel and visit a loved one in an Israeli prison. And at the end of the day, you have to wonder, why? What's this all about? I think it's part of this larger sense of deep insecurity that Israel has. And it's not insecurity in terms of physical safety. It's not like anybody's ever worried that Palestinians will militarily overpower Israel or anything like that, or even that there exists any kind of military or existential threat, a physical existential threat to actual Israelis. But I think there is a very serious concern in terms of the legitimacy of Israel, the way people view Israel. So, why does Israel need a nation-state law? Palestinians don't need a law that tells them that Arabic is their language. Palestinians would even dream of passing a law that says that Arabic is the language of Palestine. Israel has to pass a law that made it so. It's like a little kid jumping up and down, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. This is the mentality. This is the mentality. And you have to wonder, this enormous army, this continuous, nonstop shedding of Palestinian blood like it was completely cheap. And then adding more restrictions and more restrictions and more restrictions. Like Jonathan said, at first, a while ago, it was the BDS was the monster. So God forbid that the BDS spreads. And the BDS, for a while, was the code word for any really Palestine solidarity. So if you are any part of any kind of Palestinian solidarity group, or if you express solidarity on social media, then at the border, you're going to be met with, with more scrutiny. But this constant need to add restrictions and make life harder and harder and harder. And it's very interesting the wording that they use, because most of the document, they talk about Judea, Samaria, Judea, Samaria, Judea, Samaria, but the name, of course, the title of the agency that deals with it, which is of course part of the IDF, it's part of the Israeli military, talks about territories. You know, so is it the territories or is it Judea and Samaria? And I looked up once the website of the Judea and Samaria police, or the branch of the Judea and Samaria within the Israeli police force. And it's very interesting how they describe Judea and Samaria and all the cities and the settlements and how open they are and wonderful and modern and so on and promising. However, they face a certain challenge, and that challenge is the fact that they are surrounded, not the other way around, they are surrounded and live in close proximity to hostile, problematic population. And that, you don't need to explain who the hostile, problematic population is. It's obvious that, you know, they have. But on the other hand, when you look at all the other bureaucracies that exist, they always only apply to Palestinians. I mean, the entire southern half of Palestine, the Naqab, is governed by a separate agency, an independent agency called the Agency for the Development of the Negev. You know, they call the Naqab Negev. Why? Now, this agency doesn't deal with the Israelis who live there, who, by the way, enjoy some of the highest standard of living throughout the entire country. It only applies to the Palestinian Bedouin who live there, who are the poorest of the poor among Israeli citizens, and live under some of the worst restrictions in terms of where they can live and how they can gain employment and so on. That's why there's such high unemployment and poverty. So there's an agency, an entire bureaucracy. They have their own police force. They have their own laws and regulations that regulate the life of Palestinians. Here again, all of this, none of this, I mean, like I said, if anybody wants to go and live for 3 months or 6 months in a settlement in the West Bank, none of this applies to them. It only applies, and it doesn't, I don't think it even says that explicitly in the document. So in other words, it's understood that we're only talking about Arabs here. Don't be ridiculous. Obviously, we're not talking about an Israeli or an American Jew or anybody who wants to go and visit the settlement near Hebron in Kiryat Arba. You know, it's in there and it's explicit. It's very similar in a way. It reminds me a little bit of home demolitions. So in the Naqab alone, which has 350,000 Palestinian Bedouin, there were something in the last 4 years close to 10,000 home demolitions. That's a lot. How many of those do you think were executed against Israeli homes, Israeli Jewish homes? 1, 2, 3? Zero. Zero. So what does that tell us? Do Israelis never build without a permit? Is it possible? I mean, I know Israelis that built the closed, had a balcony and turned it into a room without a permit. But they pay a fine, the inspector comes, they don't pay the fine, they go to court, 5 years later there's a court date. Meanwhile, they have an extra room. Maybe they'll pay a fine eventually. You never see the army coming in, closing the street and demolishing it. You know what I mean? It's like 2,500 home demolitions per year, only in that part of the country. We're not talking about Jerusalem, the West Bank, the rest of 1948, where there's tens of thousands of home demolitions. Or does it tell us that they only demolish Palestinian homes? So all of these regulations are always targeting Palestinians, targeting Palestinians, targeting Palestinians. And I think it has to do with this enormous fear, not of a physical threat, but the fact is that there is no legitimacy to this entire political entity called the State of Israel, and the world is beginning to notice. So they want to limit access, they want to limit the life, and they really think that by executing and passing all these new laws and strengthening all these other laws and making it harder, the world's not going to notice that basically what they're trying to do is hide something that they cannot hide because their crimes are committed in broad daylight. So that's, I think, again, it's just a piece of a puzzle of a greater, or piece in the greater puzzle of something that they're trying to do, and I think they're failing miserably.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to hear from Hannah now, who you have been hearing you and seeing you making these faces as everybody's talking, because you've definitely seen and experienced a lot of stuff. So It's always good to hear the perspective from someone who, routinely is seeing this, and is experiencing it. So please share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Jinan. And I do want to thank ADC for the amazing work they've been doing through the years. Every week I run into someone who really was helped, affected, or influenced by the amazing work ADC been doing, and in particular for doing this panel. One of the issues I feel we're facing globally is there is not enough attention being given to this particular new rules and not enough noise is being made about it. Maybe in the US, it's a little better than other places in the world, but it seems like in Europe, many of the Arab countries, there is not much attention being given to it, even though it's very dangerous. However, on the other end, I think female are the ones who are leading these campaigns, which gives me some more hope that we might get somewhere with it. There is already new procedures that are being added that many people has been facing, and many in particular from the Arab American community. A couple of issues I want to mention so people are aware of. There are some people who've been back within less than 9 months and they send them back. So if you've been there within less than 9 months, just pay attention to that one. And then many people who are applying for the 45 days in advance, they're making them go through Jordan. So I was talking to someone about it the other day who's an American, and he's like, you're going to the Middle East, so why not make a trip of it and just go to Jordan and Palestine, spend a few more days in Jordan. For those who don't know the experience of crossing the bridge, it's, one of a kind. Crossing the bridge, it's a 60-mile trip, but it's nowhere anywhere to 60 minutes. You crossing the bridge, you basically have to start with going with a taxi to the Jordanian borders. You have to go through security, then you have to go through paperwork, you have to wait in line, then you have to go get your luggage again, upload it on a bus, go with the bus, unload it again, give it to the Israelis, go through security again, go through passport checks and paperwork again, go get your luggage again, upload it to another bus, go to the Palestinian area, unload it from the bus, go through security again, go through passport check again, and then you get to a taxi, and then you can go wherever you wanted to go. Sometimes this could be 16 or even more hours to go through this trip. In a good day, it's probably 4 or 5 hours. 4 or 5 hours usually in the summer, it's 90, 100 degrees. Most of these areas don't have air conditioning in them. Most of it, it's just miserable experience. Type of humiliation you experience is unbelievable. And God forbid you forget to have a passport or forget to show a paper. And the amount of papers you have to take with you is like this thick. You have to have some papers for the Jordanians, some for the Israelis, some for the Palestinians. It's just unbelievable. Last year, I happened to take a trip one time to Europe, and it was unbelievable. I only have to hold my American passport. I didn't have to have this many papers with me the way I would be traveling internationally usually. And if you forget one of these papers, your day is gone. I was going this past Easter in April there, and I forgot to upload my bags into one of the buses. And so I was like, what do I do now? The bus driver said, we have to go ask that basically very young soldier, see what she says. She might let you wait for 3 or 4 buses in the sun, and each bus takes like another half an hour, and then she'll let you go back, upload your bags, and come back. She's gonna make me, his plan was to wait 2 hours just to go back to be able to get the bags and come back. No, it wasn't that long, but she made me wait, but that's basically the daily life of anybody crossing the bridge. You just go through an unbelievable experience. In a way, it makes you don't want to go again. In a way, it makes you just, it cannot be any more inferior than it is crossing the bridge. So now they're making a lot of basically Americans who are applying to go through the permit, go through Jordan, and no longer can go through to Tel Aviv. There's a few cases that happened in the last week. And if you happen to have a Jordanian passport, which many Palestinian Americans did have, however, and the ones who immigrated a long time ago, according to the new laws, you are going to be treated as Jordanian, not as Palestinian. One of the most amazing parts about this law is that if you happen to have an ID, like a passport from the 5 Arab countries that have diplomatic relations with Israel, you're basically treating the most inferior way possible. These people from these countries are not allowed basically to take these permits. They have to go through the hardest process in order to be able to get this treatment. So if you happen to be an American and have a Jordanian passport, you're going to be treated as a Jordanian and not as an American in this case. The distinguished panel already covered many of the amazing points about it. Some of the points that's still not very clear is if you're going on a mixed visa, for example, if you're going like to Jerusalem and to Ramallah, how do you get treated? As many said, if you're going to the settlements, you're going to get the red carpet treatment. But if you're going to a university in one of the settlements, you can go. If you're going to one of the universities in the West Bank, you have to apply, and they only accept 150 students. Nobody knows how they're going to accept them, but that's the maximum. And here we're talking about how did this number come? Nobody knows. How many students are there? There is many. There is one program through the European Union alone that basically does exchange students with the Mediterranean countries. This is the only one that has data, so this is why I'm referring to this one. It actually had over 300 students in 1 year right before the pandemic. So we're talking about many, many hundreds, and now they're limiting it to 150. And really, there is no way to know. You're just going to apply, and I mean, you know, when you're applying to like a graduate school or something, you know, if you have a good grade, at least you have an idea if you're going to be accepted or not. In this case, no clue what's going to happen. Tourism, basically, like Jonathan said, there is no way. What that means, Bethlehem is going to have no tourism. What that means, and I hate to put it in this perspective, what that means is the Christian community in the Holy Land is going to be gone very, very soon. It's already like getting very low in numbers, but with these laws, and if it does get applied rigidly, I mean, we're not going to be looking at more than 10 years, and there would not be any Christians in the West Bank. A lot of the Christians in Bethlehem depend on tourism. So if tourism is shut down, many of them, they're not going to be able to survive. The other area where there is a good Christian concentration is in Ramallah. But this community is very, very dependent on the diaspora. And here, we're not just talking about economical dependent. When we're talking about the small community where intermarriage is not something very popular, I mean, even trying to find a husband in a very small community or a wife becomes very hard. If there is no interaction with the diaspora, for most of this community, the only solution is immigrating out. It's already suffering from a huge immigration problems as of now, but with these laws, it's going to end up, I mean, predictions now is going to last 40, 50 years. With these laws, I don't think it will last more than 10 years. And in this particular aspect, I do want to mention that the Christian presence in the Holy Land, it's not really about just some particular religion being present. I mean, here we're talking for Christianity in general, it's going to be a main problem. You're basically going to be losing the 2,000 years of traditions that kept the actual simplicity and the actual traditions that has not gotten commercialized like most of it happened in the West, in the Holy Land, in the area where it happened. For the Palestinians, we're talking about adding a lot of diversity. We're talking about adding many, many different aspects that basically enhance the Palestinian society. For example, in the West Bank, the second employer is actually the church. After the authority, the second employer in Palestine is the church through its healthcare system, through its, through its schools, and so on. And in general, for basically just adding to Jerusalem, just making Jerusalem a diversity, I mean, losing the Christian community and just making the church as a museum is going to be a big, big loss for the whole world. I don't want to waste too much time, but many people have been working on many different campaigns. Like Chris said, we've been working together on many different campaigns through the administration. We also started campaigns to educate congressmen about it. Unfortunately, they don't seem to know anything about it. In the last couple of weeks, we met with almost 40 representative offices across the country, and maybe 3 or 4 were aware of the issue. Most of them were not aware. But the good news that all of them were really willing to listen when it comes to discrimination against Americans and when it comes to basically not letting Americans in. Even the Republican congressmen who are not usually close to Palestinian issues were actually very willing to listen. And there is a couple of them who already wrote basically something to the State Department about this issue. Thank you for raising this issue again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Hannah. That was literally absolutely amazing. But I mean, listening to him, how many of you were like discouraged just listening to him to even try to go to Palestine? Like that's literally where I'm at this year. I wanted to go this summer, but honestly, just hearing, I mean, it's literally up to them. Like Jonathan said, it depends on their mood. They're upset. They just want to take it out on you. They decide they don't. I mean, when you were describing the Jordanian border, I remember the last time I was there, that's what we went through. We flew into Amman, saw some family cross the border. It was like that. You know, they went through our luggage. you know, everything was thrown all over the place. We had to repack our stuff. I mean, it's miserable, it's hot, you're waiting, you get on the bus, you have to get on another bus. I mean, all of it is really meant just to discourage people from traveling. And so it's hard because then you're put in a place, a position, do I go, do I try, do I want, you know, I want to see my family, I want to visit my homeland, or do I just not even want to bother, right? Because if you're spending all of this money to go to Palestine and then you get denied at the border and you're sent right back home, I mean, that's a huge loss, you know, for a lot of people. And is it worth even trying sometimes? But I know that a lot of us, you know, we have family there, you know, we have land, you know, we ache for home. We want to go home. We want to, you know, we want to connect with our country and our culture. And so, you know, all of this really is just, it's devastating for Palestinian Americans. And I know that it's something, like I said, our community has been very worried about. We get phone calls at the office. I get emails all the time. Chris also gets people who reach out nonstop, wanting answers. But the thing is, we don't have answers. We can't give you guys a concrete answer, unfortunately. Do you want to talk a little bit more, Chris, about, you said you and Hannah were working on the visa waiver program, and ADC obviously is part of this, you know,
Yes.
this
Yeah.
work, so.
So with the visa waiver program, to quick background, it was started back in the 80s. Most of the countries that are part of the visa waiver program right now are European Union countries. And when the program was created, Congress was very intentional about making sure that it wasn't just a discretionary, we can negotiate with whatever country and add them. They listed out specific metrics, specific conditions that apply for a country to be admitted. Hannah and ADC have been meeting, like I said, with DHS, and at least personally, I know that, you know, there still are frustrations with the administration, but personally, I've found that the staff at DHS have been very open to hearing our concerns, to going out and looking for the facts and not just listening to, you know, what this pundit says or that organization says. They take what we've told them and they go and they verify it. One quote from these meetings that's kind of stood out to me from DHS is they've told us very explicitly, listen, a blue passport is a blue passport. And if you have one, you should not be treated like any other nationality because you are an American citizen. So
Should is the operative word.
should. And, you know, we have pushed and made sure that they keep that as kind of one of their driving forces. And the other quote before I, you know, open it up for discussion, for questions that, you know, they've told us is this is not a negotiation. You know, as much as, you know, the so-called state of Israel wants to, you know, find the wiggle room, quote unquote, in these conditions, whether it be reciprocity or the non-immigrant visa denial rate or any of these other conditions, there's not a negotiation. DHS is not going in there and saying, okay, let's work with you to find the ways that we can make it okay. They're going to the Israeli authorities. They're going to internally saying, we're not going to, if they don't meet these conditions, they're not going to be admitted. And so, you know, we're continuing these conversations because we want to make sure that our voice, the Palestinian American voice, the Palestinian voice, the Arab American voice, the Arab voice is heard in these discussions so that we are not excluded like we so often are.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. So the law right now, as I understand it, when you land in a particular country, any country, if you have dual nationality, the passport of the country you're visiting is the one that applies. So if I have an American passport and an Italian passport, when I land in Italy, the Italian passport is the one that applies. And that's, is it true that that's the case across the board, right? So the question is...
Yeah, it's a very good one.
So that kind of applies to
It-
people
it-
who have a Hawiyya, a Palestinian
Yes,
ID.
so I see the connection. I think it's more what you present. So if you have dual, in this example, you're dual U.S. Italian citizen, you show up at the Italian border control. If you present yourself as an American, they're part of the visa waiver program. So they cannot say, oh, you have an Italian passport, we have to treat you as an Italian. You can, it's what you present.
Because that's the case. Okay,
someone
so
saying
that's-
no?
So that's not a crime.
No, is that not the case? Listen, I'm open because I admit that I might. No, I understand that is true. Right now, if you
Palestine, yeah, that is
in
the
Palestine,
case.
and that
Hawiyya
that is-
trumps everything else.
Yes, that is one of those issues, the primacy issue that.
So if you have an Italian passport, that's the one that governs the laws.
The government, when we've been talking to the government, the U.S. government is telling the Israelis that they must treat the American passport as primacy
So if I
to
land
be
with
part of the
my-
visa waiver program.
So I have dual citizenship. I have an Israeli passport and an American passport. And when I come in, I have to show my Israeli passport. I can't
Yeah.
show my American passport. So
I think we're mixing between
Yeah.
going into and between the visa waiver
You're
program.
also-
no, I know, but I'm just
You're
wondering.
also talking. You're
so-
also
so-
talking about going into your own country. That's the difference. So if you're Italian going into Italy, yes, okay, but that's not what we're talking about with Israel Palestine.
No,
Right?
but if you have dual, I'm wondering about people who have dual.
Yeah. So when it comes to also talking about you're entering Palestine, you're not entering Israel, and they treat you as a Palestinian. They don't treat you as an American. It's not. It's what Jonathan had said. They make that equivalency, yes, but that primacy issue, because there are so many more restrictions and there's so much more discrimination, there is that inherent problem when it comes to visa waiver. Now, we've also heard, not directly from DHS, but there are, like we were talking about with the boogeyman of the day, the BDS or whatever it may be. If you get denied and that's the reason, and you go to the embassy or go to the State Department and you complain, their response is, a country can make those political decisions, and that's probably not going to change. But the fact that they don't even recognize that you have an American passport and that you can't choose that this is the passport, this is what I am traveling on. That is the issue.
Yeah, but also what about some of us who don't have a Palestinian Hawiyya? Like, I don't have one. My parents
Yes.
never got
And
us one.
Force you.
For a reason,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
no,
for
it-
us, like, we only have American.
Yes.
So if I'm going as an American and they're still denying me.
Exactly. Yeah. So if
Right, that's the
if we
issue
travel,
really mostly
they treat us
because-
as Palestinian,
yeah.
even though we don't have a Palestinian ID.
Okay, I think what's important is the ideology behind it. They don't follow that rule because of primacy. They follow that rule because they have an ideology that if you are a Jew, you are entitled, in fact, you are urged to come and settle. If you are a Palestinian, they will use, for ideological purposes, every way to prevent you from coming and to claim residency there. And if you enter there and you have a Hawiyya, they don't want you to have the protection of being a U.S. passport holder.
Which really
Even if you've lost your Hawiyya,
Yeah. Oh,
even if you no longer have the right of residency, they will still treat you negatively as a holder of Hawiyya without recognizing your Hawiyya, giving you rights to reside.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right? It's like the double-edged sword.
here's the final point I want to make on this. It's not so much about traveling through the bridge, though that is an issue, an enormous issue. It's Palestinian Americans that hold both the Palestinian Hawiyya and a U.S. passport can't fly into Tel Aviv.
Right.
If you land in Tel Aviv, they say, go to Jordan.
Yep.
You cannot enter. And that is where the visa waiver program issue comes into play. Is that I'm not a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. I am a U.S. Palestinian, and that is, they treat me not as a U.S. citizen. They would treat me as a
So
Palestinian.
that was my question.
Yeah.
The visa waiver program trumps that.
Yes.
'Cause- Okay.
Yes, and it's specific to entering Israel. When it comes to if Hannah, you can talk about how you would travel differently should the visa waiver program be reciprocity be implemented.
So there is 14 points of discrimination that we were able to identify that some Americans face compared to other Americans. One of them is like, I cannot go to Tel Aviv because I have a Palestinian passport, have to go to Jordan and then cross the bridge. Other points is like, if somebody with a Palestinian Hawiye cannot go to Jerusalem from Ramallah, for example, or Hebron. They have to apply for a permit and go through the process if they get approved. And basically, there is another whole category of Palestinians living in Jerusalem. They basically have a laissez-passer, and they also have different rules that applies to them. For example, they cannot stay out of the country, I think, more than 2 years, otherwise they end up losing it. While somebody living in West Jerusalem, they would never use their ID. So there is many different ways that Americans are being treated differently. And like Chris was saying, what the DHS has been saying is a blue passport is a blue passport, which means in their eyes, all these 14 points of discrimination against particular Americans are not going to exist moving forward. I think the issue here, they're looking at it, is somebody with an American and Israeli passport is treating totally different than somebody with a Palestinian American passport.
And again, it's specific to entering Israel. If the visa, let's say, perfect world, we have, or not perfect, let's say Israel's added to the visa waiver program, and I still decide if I have the Hawiye and a U.S. passport, still decide to go through the bridge, they can do what they want. That process isn't going to change. But rather than having me land in Tel Aviv and then telling me you have to go to Jordan, now they have to. If reciprocity was fully implemented, they would have to let you land and travel throughout Israel, wherever you want to go, because you have this 3-month tourist visa, you're an American citizen, and then you can enter into the West Bank. But you're still dealing with the entry into the West Bank, but now you're able to, at least there's a little bit more travel freedom.
So is this a political decision or is this an agency decision?
This is
very political.
There's politics in it, but the decision itself is statutory. They have to meet these conditions or they do not get admitted. So as much as, even as high as President Biden saying, I want this to happen, he can want it all he wants, but if they don't meet the conditions, they don't meet the conditions and that's it. Unlike the COGAT rules, it's not based on what they want when they want it. It's you got to have met them.
Do you think that there would be any room for them to get an exception? Because we all know Israel does get a lot of exceptions within our government.
That has been
right.
Yeah. So
let's be
they would have
honest.
to pass it through Congress.
Yes, it would have.
Well, that is a very likely situation then, right? Because we all know that
I mean, so the
This issue, Congress is not likely.
yeah, it's unlikely that Congress would do that because it opens up the door to other countries being added, and
Nobody would show up for the vote, I think.
so
Place will be empty.
So there's by law there's no exception that the executive branch, the administration, can make. Specifically, Congress always has the power to legislate how they want, so they could change it. Whether that happens is, I think, more unlikely than likely, and there would be enough lead time for us to very vociferously let people know that this is happening. And in the end, it is a statutory decision, and that's something that has been clearly communicated both by us to DHS and DHS right back to us. That, when we get onto these meetings and we tell them, hey, listen, this is what we've been hearing, these are what the media reports are saying, the response is always, listen, don't, like, they can say what they want, but like, if you have concerns, like, just let us know and we'll tell you again, this is not a negotiation with them.
Okay, so this is interesting then, because now I'm wondering, why are they implementing these rules if they want to be part of the visa waiver program? And clearly that's not,
Very good question.
that literally makes no
I
sense,
can
have the
answer.
answer.
I can answer that.
Okay.
It's very clear that those who wrote these regulations did not even think about the waiver program. They were only concerned with how do we deal with this population under our control? How can we keep controlling them without acknowledging that we are trying to play a political, ideological game of making life difficult for Palestinians? How can we write the whole regulation without talking about Jews and Arabs? But only somehow everybody knows that that's in the back of our mind. Which brings one other point, if I may, which is very important. The existence of the Palestinian Authority and the existence of the mirage of a two-state solution, that there's somehow some Palestinian state, we're not going to allow it to happen, we know that. But we can talk about it, and it allows us to unload some of our responsibilities. It allows us to discriminate without discriminating. It allows us to act as if we are a country of law, while in fact we are just an apartheid regime. And this is very important because so many people in the Palestinian Authority, for example, and in the Arab world, are totally comfortable with this. They will pretend that there is something like a Palestinian state in the making, that it's happening, when everybody knows it's not happening. But that mirage is allowing Israel to continue to control the whole area without giving Palestinians equality and rights. You want rights? Go complain to your own people. You have your own government. That's why you are suffering. Not because we are oppressing you. You have your own government, your own people. Go complain to them about what's happening to you.
That's a whole other
That's a
story.
brilliant question, the one you ask. And I think it raises more questions than answers, because is the administration gonna go with the visa waiver even with these rules or not? I wish I'm as optimistic as you are, Chris. I think I'm older and witnessed many different scenarios in the past that does not make me as optimistic. I really hope the Biden administration will stand strong on this. I really hope they will follow the rules as is and they will just stay firm on it. But that's a question we have to see. And then let's say they do stay so strong, would the Israeli government risk the visa waiver, which is something supposedly many of the leaders in it is going to be their main accomplishment. So how is it going to play in the politics of Israel? Are they going to accept to be out of the waiver? And would they make an exception to the Americans? If they do make exception to the Americans, how would other countries react? Would the Europeans accept it, that the Americans get treated differently than Europeans? And then the Arab countries, does it make sense that the Arab countries who has relations with Israel are treated worse than countries that don't have relationship with Israel? We'll see.
I think though,
Yeah,
I think your question is a good one, but I think historically we can see that there's a it's like the state of Israel is divided into two parts. You've got the security part, and then you've got the diplomatic part. And the diplomatic part's job is to sell so that the security side can do whatever they want. And I'll give you two examples. Rachel Corrie shooting Abu Akli. They're both American citizens, right? There was absolutely no consequences at all whatsoever.
Omar Assad too.
Huh?
Omar Assad.
Yeah,
In February.
and on and on and on and on and on. I'm just giving those two as like, one was a relatively long time ago, and one was just now. And the strength of the diplomatic side of the state of Israel has always been, going back from the even pre-state, has always been that they were able to sell it and get away with it. And so if we look historically, there's an assumption, and this has been, and this kind of an Israeli attitude anyway, we can convince the Americans there, we got them in our pocket, it'll be fine, don't worry. We'll get the senators, we'll get the congressmen, we'll get the influencers, we'll get people who go donate money, we're gonna get this through. But it's very often that we've seen the security side, the so-called security side, act in ways that would shock you and say, well, if they want this and they want this and they want this, why are they doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Yet they get away with it anyway. So, but who knows? Maybe this is going to be a precedent, and I certainly hope they don't get away with it. But historically, at least I think from the way Israelis view it, and the state of Israel views it, they are probably assuming that they can do whatever the hell they want for security reasons and hide it under the security reasons excuse, and then allow the diplomats to do their thing.
Yeah, that's exactly where my mindset was. That's why I said that. And I was kind of hoping that maybe what they're telling you is right and true. So I don't know. We'll see. But again, there's been a lot of, extra conditions given to them. And, they've let them slide with a lot of things. And even if you're an American and you go to Palestine and you're attacked or anything happens and you come and you make a complaint, I mean, there's no protection.
No.
And really, as an American, right? As if you go to any other country and the same thing happens to an American, they would raise hell, that they would, be talking to the governments, they would, place conditions. But if you're a Palestinian or an Arab with an American passport and you go to Palestine, and I've seen it, I worked at organizations before ADC, and we've seen it through ADC, people who go, they're mistreated, they come back, they want to make a complaint, and it goes nowhere.
I think the moving forward, we always keep our eyes out for these poison pills, the potential of legislation or potential for weakening. But the goal is that we are going to continue our meetings and continue to raise the issues directly with them so that they don't forget that there is a stark difference. And I think in our first meeting with DHS, I told them flat out, like, I've never seen the house that my family lived in for generations. It's still standing. There's an Israeli family living in it now, but it's in Haifa. I've never seen it. I've never gone and visited because I've been too afraid that I'm going to show up, be detained for 6 hours, and then sent home. And that is the crux of the issue, because you're going to have as many stories as Hannah can find of people actually happening, but you're going to miss out on the thousands, if not the tens of thousands, millions, whatever it may be, of people who never even tried, because of the inherent discrimination.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so we're running up on like almost 10 minutes left, and so if anyone has any questions, I know we had an extra microphone, I don't know where it is, but if someone has a question, raise your hand, and we will bring the microphone around. Okay, we've got a couple. I know Nora back there, raise your hand. Okay, the mic's coming to you.
So it's not so much a question as sort of encouragement. I would encourage anybody who wants to travel to try and travel, because I think this is essential to sort of our resistance. And I think the psychological game that they play, I would agree with Miko, but I would say there's also a psychological game that they play. And I think it's really important to go, and I'm going. I bought my ticket. I'm going to try. I'm a little bit concerned, but worst comes to worst, they'll send me back and I'll have my summer here, and it's a few $1,000s. And I know that might be economically not viable for some people, but I think for the majority of us, it's viable. And I would just encourage you to go see your house in Haifa. As a matter of fact, I'm going to speak to you after. You're going to tell me where it is. I'm going to go see it.
No, that's amazing. No, Nora, you're right, but as someone who works at a nonprofit, ADC, I need a raise. I can't afford to just throw $3,000 away, right? Just so I can buy a ticket and go. But obviously, for those of us who are able to, it's a form of our resistance. And it's meant to discourage us. We definitely, don't want them to get to a point where none of us are going because we're afraid of what they may do. And a lot of times it's conditional. There's someone that we know that went recently, didn't think she was going to get in, boom, walked right in, no problem. And so really, it just depends. I mean, my mom is going next week. I don't doubt that she'll be able to get in, but, you never really know. But at the same time, we have family there still. We want to be able to still see, our family and our relatives and like I said before, connect with our country and our land. Another question? Yep.
Yeah, I think, I hope there will be a lot of action towards Congress, because I think, as you pointed out, this is a congressional law, basically, that, you know, we won't accept racism against American citizens. And I think Congress people from all stripes are open to that. And so a mass campaign of talking to Congress as well as the administration and Department of Homeland Security is very important. I think people, regardless of political stripe, will be against racism and apartheid. I mean, even right-wing Republicans claim to be against racism. Let's meet their bluff, and let's make it. I hope ADC and others will have a massive, or as big a campaign as possible to get people to talk to Congress. Thank you. Great presentation.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Paul, thank you for asking this question. I think you've been part of many meetings already with your representatives in your area, and they've been very encouraging, including a letter from Representative Waxman, who did send a letter to State Department and DSS asking about this issue. Like I said, in the Ramallah Federation, we met with almost 40 officers in the last 2 weeks, and we still continue to meet with many of them in the future, as well as many other organizations who are meeting with them. There was 2 letters already sent from Congress, one led by Congressman Jamar Bowman, which he actually addressed the educational system about it. And the second one was led by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, which was talking about more the general and the visa waiver and so on. Our experience with Congress has been very pleasant. I mean, many people who has never really showed any sympathy towards the Palestinians were willing to listen on this issue. And I think it's very, very important that we raise as much awareness as we can about this issue. It's actually stunning to me that in Europe there has been no movement whatsoever about this issue, even though they're probably going to be the ones who would be affected the most. I mean, we've seen some movement in the US Congress, but we haven't seen much in Europe. Arab media, we have seen almost nothing written about this issue. And this is something that has a global effect. So I think one of our main tasks is to really raise as much awareness as we can about it to our friends, our family, and definitely our representatives.
Absolutely. Next question.
Yes, hi. I am on my 4th U.S. passport. Been living here forever. I was born and raised in the city of Jerusalem. I came here as a young man, almost a teenager. And every time I renew my passport, place of birth on it is Jerusalem. But my last passport says place of birth is Israel.
Oh.
So when I disputed that, they said, well, Jerusalem is in Israel, so it's proper.
I just got my passport renewed, and I demanded Jerusalem, and it said Jerusalem.
So yes.
In fact, I went online. I'm sorry, I went online. This is just a few weeks ago. And when I put Jerusalem, it comes up, you put the city, the state comes up. When I put Jerusalem, the state that came up was Jerusalem. So there is no other option.
So yeah, so
I'm
there's
really,
yeah. So this is I can't remember. It was either 2019 or 2020 in the previous administration. So former President Trump promulgated a rule for USCIS. That's the folks that run the passport services, and it made that distinction where if you were, it's determined by when you were born. If you were born, and I can't remember the specific years, but
It was created.
before the state was created, or there was like certain qualifications for you to be able to put a specific city. You couldn't get, if you were born pre-48, you couldn't have Palestine still. You could get your city or your village, but you couldn't get Palestine. But if it was after, you need to make special requests like Miko did to say, I want my city. But it's a result of that rule, and that's another one of those, Trump-era rule changes or executive orders that, we're working with the Biden administration to, A, make them aware that this is an issue for our community, but B, to get them to reverse it.
And there are a lot of exceptions, it seems to me, because I know people who've insisted on Palestine and got Palestine, even if they were born after 48.
Yeah, it's...
But the way, when I did mine, there was no option. When I put Jerusalem, there was no other option. The state that came up as well was, in other words, the country was Jerusalem too. So that didn't even give an option.
Yeah, it depends on the passport officer you get.
It was online.
I know, I understand. I'm saying for you that maybe that they have changed the online platform.
Try again.
Yeah, so talking about if you received your passport and you want to make it, change it, and It's just, it depends on the day, the person, you get all of it.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
you know,
Next
absolutely.
question. Who has the mic? Okay, and there's a question back here too afterwards.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The discussion is very good, and beside the visas for American Palestinians, why don't you discuss also the Palestinian students and Arab and other nationalities in all different universities in the U.S. and visiting the Palestine, you know, Palestine, like the Jewish people are sending students there every year, every time. So this is a big issue. This is a good
Yeah.
thing also. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. I mean, I think what you're referring to is the birthright programs, which,
Yeah.
you know, just have a, where do I start?
I know, yeah. I mean, it's a completely different condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, that needs a panel by itself. You know what I'm saying? I
But-
mean, that is obviously something that we've discussed before, and it's something that we always discuss, right? I mean, I definitely, there's a discrepancy, you know, right? I mean, Jewish American kids born and raised here in America can easily, you know, go on a free trip, you know, and stay and study. You know, I've known actually a couple of them who have done that recently, and you know, it boggles my mind because then I'm having discussions with them like, do you not see your privilege? You know, someone born and raised here, but someone who's actually Palestinian, who was exiled, cannot return, and yet you as an American, because you're Jewish, you just automatically have these rights, you know? But I mean, obviously, yeah, that's something that's a whole other discussion, but we will discuss that.
Thanks. Two things. From what I understand, if you fly into Tel Aviv and you get denied entry, you get sent back to the point of where you departed from.
Yeah.
So one suggestion would be, if you're gonna, don't travel from New York, travel from Tunis or somewhere where you want to at least enjoy a few days.
Like
the
make
other
the most
thing
of
is-
it.
The other thing is, in 2017, I was denied entry twice, like in the same week. They didn't give me any sort of 5-year ban or anything like that I've heard other people have had. So then I went to the embassy in Jordan, or the consulate in Jordan, and I complained. I tried to file a report. I came back to the States. I tried to make a report. And I don't know if anything was ever officially documented. But this goes to my question about there's a 3% reciprocity or something like that they have to stay under. So how do we know when we get denied that we are, what actions do we take when we get denied to make sure that we're documented?
Absolutely. So I think there's two kind of types of denials. Like there's the type of denial that you're referring to, which is a denial of an American traveling there. And that number isn't captured in statute it's not a condition that Israel has to meet. It's not that they have to allow X percentage of Americans in. The visa denial rate condition is specifically Israelis that want to travel to the United States. So right now you still need to have a visa to travel to the United States. You have to go and apply at an embassy or a consulate. You go in for an interview. And I think as of 2020, Israel had a 6%, around 6% denial rate. So that meant that 6% of all Israelis that are applying for a visa to travel to the United States were getting denied. And they can be denied for any number of reasons, whether the visa officer believes that they're going to overstay their visa, whatever it may be. So that's the number that they have to, that's that 3% number that you might hear when people talk about the visa waiver program. When it comes to us Americans traveling there, getting denied or having even if you not denied, if you're detained for hours upon hours, we still need to capture that data. That's not a metric that the U.S. government collects with any regularity. And it's difficult because sometimes people will go have a bad experience, get in, and they say, you know what, I got in, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers, I'm not going to make waves. Or they get denied and it's just, I'm so tired, I just want to go home, I don't want to talk to anybody about this, I just want to be done with this, wash my hands of it, and try again, maybe. But we need to when we're working on trying to collect those stories, what happened, but it's really self-selecting where, somebody has to actively say, I was denied or I was detained and this is what happened. Because there's no regulated way for anybody really to figure out what happened. And sometimes you don't even get a reason. They just say no.
Of course. I mean, most of the time
Yeah.
there's no reason. They're not going to tell you.
So it's really difficult to, even if you say you got denied, we can track, we have X number of people tried and got denied, but is that a real percentage? We don't know. Like the metrics are not easy, but the narrative is always the point, because we can always use those narratives to say, here's a concrete example of what happened to an American citizen who tried to enter Israel.
No, but of course, I mean, it makes sense to also want to count every single one because
yeah.
they're probably going over that 3% threshold.
Well, remember the 3% is them
Just for them coming here?
There's no statute. There's no
In the visa waiver?
in the visa waiver program. There's no condition of how many Americans
They can deny.
they can deny. It's all about Israelis coming here because remember the visa waiver program is a way for nationals of both countries to travel. Essentially, it's still a visa, but you're visa free. You don't have to apply. You don't have to go through this. You are just getting a 3-month visa. And
At the airport.
So if that's the case, what does Israel have to do in order to qualify? Because they can qualify, they can meet all the requirements, and then deny people when they come in.
so
So I don't
that's
understand why
so
wouldn't
that's
they
something
say-
that we've so let's say they do meet this 3% non-immigrant visa denial rate, which it's a lot of work to be able to get that number, even as close as they are with 6%. It's not like it's not that they may hit 3% next year and then they're in.
Oh, so that's one of the conditions.
That's one of the conditions. But it's not even that they hit that 3% and then they're in immediately. It's you need to consistently show that your people are not being denied visas. Because we're not going to give every Israeli citizen a 3-month tourist visa if there's enough of a percentage of people that we believe are going to overstay their visa. Yeah. And one thing that I said this directly to the Secretary of Homeland Security when I met with him in March in Dearborn, was, it doesn't matter what, Israel may say all the right things, and they're obviously not with this ordinance, but they even if they say all the right things, if the practices don't change, then nothing has changed. So you need to make sure that the practices change before you make any final decision, and that has been our underlying, point the whole time is, don't rush the process. If you're going to do this, do it right, and make sure that these things are in place before you make a decision. Otherwise, they're going to do exactly what you said. They're going to say all the right things, meet all the metrics on their face, and then continue to deny and continue to discriminate.
Yeah, I know. Okay. We are over time. We can talk about this probably all day, but we have a gala to prepare for. And so we need to reset the room and get everything situated. So final thoughts from our speakers before we wrap up?
Yeah. This may have been a very discouraging panel. I think all of us have stories to tell, and it's important that we tell those stories directly to our representatives. Just tell them what happened to you, and you'll be surprised how good they will be and how sympathetic they are. But I want to end on a proper and a positive note. The world is changing. Even American Congress people are now more open to hearing our story. Israel's image that it had worked so hard to create over the years is now disintegrating continuously. And what we do, what you do, what activists do, telling our story, documenting it, presenting it in very understandable, rational terms that people can hear, showing the discrimination and the racism and the apartheid is going to have an effect. When, we don't know exactly, but we do know that from year to year, it's becoming much, much easier for us to tell our story and for it to be believed and for it to have consequences. So don't give up. Hang in there. It is changing and it will change thanks to all your work and to ADC and other organizations.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate it. Any final thoughts? Anybody else? We good? Let's thank our panelists. Did an amazing job on this very difficult and uncertain subject. We did the best we could with the information that we have. Hopefully we'll see everybody in a couple hours. Reception starts at 6:30 out in the foyer. Please visit our vendors. And shout out to our AV team who's been doing an amazing job. Give them a round of applause. And the hotel staff. They've been amazing as well. And we will see you a little bit later.